Remakes, remasters, and reimaginings are kind of a weird thing because it's like, how close or accurate do you make it to the original experience? How much creative liberty do you take when trying to reimagine some kind of original piece of media to still either retain the original experience or go completely in your own direction? And with Call of Duty Zombies maps, we've seen a lot of remakes or reimagines or even straight up remasters over the years. And today specifically, I want to analyze the original Zombies Map 5 from Black Ops 1 and compare it to its remastered counterpart in Black Ops 4 called Classified. What I want to do is analyze the structure of both of these maps and figure out why, even though Classified is basically the same map, just expanded a little bit with extra rooms and a couple of different features, why it feels so incredibly different to the original experience that is 5. It's not quite as simple as old map good, new map bad. There's quite a lot about Classified that I actually prefer to the original experience that is 5, that I feel like the original experience maybe is sort of dry or bland or misses the mark on, but there's a lot of things in Classified that I think they just kind of remade the layout of the map without actually understanding what it was that made 5 charming initially, or at least what its purpose was in the context of that game. Before we get too deep in this though, we gotta pay the bills real quick. HelloFresh is the #1 meal service in America for a reason. One of the most challenging things about our modern lives when it comes to food is being able to maintain a healthy but fun and reasonably priced diet. With HelloFresh, they're able to deliver high-quality pre-portioned meals directly to your door. There are times when I'm really hungry and would like some food, but a trip to the grocery store is kind of a drive for me, and fast food is obviously not the most healthy option and can be pretty expensive. So that's where HelloFresh is one of the best options for someone like me, and I'm sure many of you guys too. Not only that, but you'll get free breakfast for life when your HelloFresh membership is active. There are some mornings where I just don't feel like cooking anything, but I would like some breakfast, and that's where HelloFresh will always have something for you there, so I don't have an excuse anymore. But the most important thing is that you can customize your meal plan to reach the goals and to eat the things that you want. You should only be getting foods that you would actually like to eat, and HelloFresh will take care of all of that prep work and portioning, and all of that, hassle going to the grocery store is eliminated. Use the QR code on screen or check the link in the description to sign up for HelloFresh today, and if you use my code, you'll get 10 free meals up front to see if you like it, and still free breakfast for life. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video today, and go check them out. I had this kind of weird realization that 5 is actually the first true Black Ops 1 Zombies map, and you might say Kino der Toten was, but Kino was made for World at War. It was actually supposed to be on that game, but it wasn't due to time constraints, and so, it was sort of built for that game and those systems, but 5 was the first ever Zombies map that was built specifically for Black Ops 1 systems, and they tried to introduce a couple of new things, but of course 5 is not the most complex map. It doesn't have its own unique perk. There's not really, a whole main Easter egg or anything of the sort, but 5 does still have a few unique features that I think set the groundwork for the sandbox that would be the rest of the Zombies maps in Black Ops 1, but I do think it can be credited as being the first ever BO1 map, as weird as that is to think about. Now, with that context in mind, of course 5 still does appear right alongside Kino der Toten in Black Ops 1, but the method in which you unlock it is also worth talking about. Usually, for most people, you're not going to have access to 5 when you load up Black Ops 1 until you've beaten the campaign. They wanted to retain that same spirit of unlocking a new Zombies map after you've beaten the single-player experience. However, in Black Ops 1, you can forcibly unlock 5 using the computer in the back of the room when you're in the interrogation chair, so you can kind of skip that whole process if you want to, but the point is, it's not a map that you initially have access to right off the bat, and so while most people figured out how to eventually unlock 5, there's still a non-zero percentage of people out there that never actually unlocked this map for their game, so it was a little bit more of a secret, and because this is kind of a secret bonus map and not the on-disc experience per se, they took some risks with this one, and they went a little bit more hardcore than Kino der Toten. I think it's fair to characterize Kino as the most casual on-disc Zombies map that we have on Black Ops 1, and 5 is kind of the slightly more challenging hardcore map. Now, obviously it's learnable, and 5 isn't incredibly hard if you sort of know what you're doing, obviously, but that's not really the point. For newer players and people maybe just jumping into zombies for the first time, 5 is going to be a very oppressive map, and it is known for its challenge in some ways. 5 used to have, or still does have, a reputation for being one of the most difficult difficult maps in Call of Duty Zombies, and that is for a few very particular reasons, namely down to some of its design choices, where I think Classified doesn't have almost any of those. Before we take apart the design choices that make this map very charming and difficult in some ways, I do want to quickly talk about the story premise for each and every map, because they are a little bit different. Obviously, both of these maps take place in the Pentagon. However, they play with very different crews between Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 4. In the original version of 5, you play as John F. Kennedy, Robert McNamara, Richard Nixon, and Fidel Castro. This makes for an incredibly strange yet charming experience where these world leaders who would never actually get along in real life, and the whole premise for them being together in the first place is the fact that there is a war and they aren't getting along, but now they're forced to cooperate and fend off against the zombies. That's kind of a fun premise. However, in Classified, this is more a smaller piece in the much bigger Ether story that was reaching its conclusion. It was setting up the Great War, and where we see Primus and Ultimus kind of meet for the first time. It's very much intertwined in the overall bigger Zombies narrative, whereas 5 is kind of just this fun little standalone moment in the zombie storyline. The takeaway here, though, is that this is the only map this crew ever appears on where we have these like presidents on this map, and obviously we would see Ultimus and Primus that are featured on Classified on virtually every map in Black Ops 3 and 4, so it's not really as unique as far as the crew goes on Classified, but it was a very core part of the experience on the original map of 5. Not to mention the obvious differences in tone and feel of the original 5 intro versus the Classified intro. They're going for something totally different, and I do think that kind of encapsulates what the map design is like a little bit as well in some ways, but when we get into it, 5 has a very deliberate design for a lot of its level layout and a couple of very smart choices that I think make this map feel the way it does that Classified does not have at all. 5's unique charm and mechanics can be seen immediately upon starting a game, where the barriers of the windows are not just wooden boards at first. They're actually these glass windows that you can break yourself, and you can start rebuilding them to get points immediately. And this doesn't make a big difference, but all of the first, initial barriers in the game are glass, and upon breaking them, then obviously they're going to be boarded up with wood. But what's interesting is some of these little things that make 5 its own experience. Again, might seem like a small, insignificant feature, but it provides a very different sound and thus experience in those first couple of rounds when the zombies are breaking through the glass instead of ripping down boards. It just feels very different, and it was certainly unique for the time. To my knowledge, this is one of the only barrier systems that is different than the traditional boards. I believe that there's a few other maps, like where you can break the windows still, that then will be boarded up with wood, but 5 really introduced that, and I think it was very charming here. I think a lot of the challenge, or the perceived challenge of 5, is due to the fact that it really does choke you out of resources for the first couple of rounds and very much encourage map exploration. In the starting room, there's not really many good viable weapon options. You have the M14 and you have the Olympia, and those are kind of trash for the initial spawn room. Now, this is a moment where 5 and Classified differ tremendously. We'll get to Classified in a second, but in 5, you only have one option where to go to continue map exploration. You need to open up this hallway over on the right that leads you to the elevator hallway. However, in Classified, you have the option to go into these back rooms that in 5 are inaccessible. So it does obviously open up a little bit of different options for you, but in 5, you need to go this way because it's a very deliberate choice for progression. Now, the elevator hallway is quite interesting because in 5, I really feel like that moment where the zombies are starting to get too overwhelming because your weaponry sucks, you have this moment of reprieve in the elevator where you get away from them and you feel like you escaped the horde, and it doesn't last too long as you open up in the war room next. Now, what's very interesting here as well between these two maps is that in 5, there is absolutely no way that you can get the mystery box without having first entered the laboratory, but in Classified, you can actually access the mystery box right off the bat from these back rooms potentially, or if you go straight into the war room, the mystery box can be on your right before you even turn on the power. This is a very different approach to 5, where the only way you can actually get to the best weaponry in the game is by diving into the most dangerous area, which is of course the laboratory, which you find by going into the second bigger elevator out of the war room. Once you enter the laboratory, you also aren't really guaranteed to know where the box is as well unless you're a little bit clever. You can look through these windows to try to see see if the mystery box is in there, but you need to turn on the power to lift these visors so that you can see which room the box will be in. Now, there are a couple of better weapons on the wall inside of the laboratory, but still, the point is, in order to access like the actual good guns in the game, you most certainly have to access the laboratory and go into this very dangerous area to acquire it. Whereas I feel like in Classified, they don't really make you do that. Number one, you have access to your specialist weapon right off the bat, but you can also get the mystery box from the back rooms or from the war room without ever touching the labs at all. I mean, obviously you need to get there to like build things and turn on the power in that map, but it's a little bit different. In 5, there's a very like deliberate risk reward going on. Once you turn on the power in the labs as well is when you finally start getting the Nova crawlers to spawn. These are a very dangerous enemy type, especially in the close quarters of the labs, because upon killing them, they release this toxic gas that will blind and slow you down a little bit. Now, there are a few ways you can kill these things without making them explode. For example, you can knife them, or you can kill them with the ray gun, which will cause them to not blow up, making them a lot more manageable to deal with and making the ray gun feel even better by comparison. But the point is, the laboratory is by far the most dangerous area in this game. However, it is also where the best reward is to be found in the mystery box as well. Now, you can hit the mystery box enough to move it, and it can leave the laboratory. It can go back upstairs to the offices, or it can go into the war room, but initially it will always spawn in the laboratory, meaning that you at least need to get the power turned on before you can start interacting with that, and then you have access to perks and all that other stuff. Once you get the power on, you now have a few more options open up to you to get around the map. You can use the elevator to get back to the war room or the offices upstairs, or you can start taking the teleporters that now appear a little bit around the map. There's one up in the office, there's one in the war room, and there's a few down in the laboratory. The thing with 5's teleporters is that, yes, they do have a probability to take you to either the offices or the war room. You can't really control that, however, but they seem to be weighted and skewed heavily in favor of the labs. Most likely, what's going to happen if you jump through one of these lab teleporters is you're just going to end up in a different part of the lab, and you're going to be running around scrambling, trying to figure out where you are. It's also very interesting because a lot of the lab's design looks very similar. Like visually, all of the rooms look incredibly identical down here. So it's a very disorienting and kind of confusing experience if you're just jumping from teleporter to teleporter, and especially with the chaoticness of the zombies chasing you, this can make for a very difficult and like heart-pounding situation. Now, let's say you do manage to escape the labs with a decent weapon, and if you're back in the war room, you now have access to turn these DEFCON panels. Now, these don't initially like tell you outright what these do. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people probably didn't even understand what these are for or could even find all of them. However, there's a couple of panels around the room that you can flip, and then once you get to the highest DEFCON, you can start using the teleporter that will not take you to the labs, the office, or the war room, but it will take you to a unique place called the Panic Room, and in here can be found the Pack-a-Punch machine. What I also really like about the Panic Room, specifically in 5 compared to Classified, is that, again, it's kind of like the elevator where you have this small moment of reprieve where you feel like you're in a little bit of a safe room. Like it is truly like a lockdown panic room where there's all of this chaoticness going outside. Maybe there's a horde right outside the door. You've got just a couple of safe, quiet moments to catch your breath, to pack-a-punch your gun, to get yourself and your team ready again to take on the horde. And it's just this like slowing down in the gameplay, this kind of slight relief of tension that makes the nonstop action more exciting. I also really like that moment where, you know, when the DEFCON panels are counting down, you can hear the horde outside of this door, and then they fly open and they all start pouring in, and you know, take them on with your upgraded weapon that you just now pack-a-punched. That's really fun, as opposed to going to the Panic Room and Classified, where it's not really the safe space, and the door, that big front door, is already open by the time you get in there, so you don't really have that push and pull, that give and take moment. Now, Pack-a-Punch is obviously not unique to 5. It had appeared on Kino der Toten and also Doris, but let's talk about the most unique feature of 5, which is its special rounds, the Pentagon Thief. Now, this is, I think, what made 5 the map memorable, to be honest. Like, I think this is what people associate most closely with this map. It's easily the most unique feature it has to offer. Now, this is a special round unlike any other, where typically we were used to just getting hellhounds at this point, these dogs that would spawn in. The Pentagon Thief will spawn in, and he's kind of this laboratory coat wearing freak who spawns in and tries to run you down, and he'll jump through teleporters and try to chase you, and if he catches up to you, he will take one of your weapons and steal them. If he steals your gun, you have a little bit of time to kill him and get it back. otherwise it's gone forever. If you don't manage to kill the Pentagon Thief, then that weapon of yours is just simply non-existent. Now, that's of course not ideal. You don't want the Pentagon Thief to always be stealing your weapons every like 5 rounds or so. That would not be very fun. So there are unique ways of dealing with him, and there's a couple of unique mechanics that he has depending on how or where you kill him. For example, if you're actually able to kill the Pentagon Thief after he steals one of your weapons, you'll get that original gun back, plus you'll get a max ammo and a free fire sale, which is really nice if you want to keep spinning the box and try for something better. But even more importantly, this map has a pretty unique drop called a bonfire sale, which makes the Pack-a-Punch machine only 1,000 points. And in order to get this, you need to kill the Pentagon Thief before he even touches you or steals any weapons at all. If you can manage this, then you'll be able to immediately jump through the teleporter. The defcons will be set to take you to the panic room, and you can upgrade guns for 1,000 points a pop, which is a huge save if you need points for, other perks, or if you want to buy claymores or the Bowie knife or something like that. The point is, if you and your team can manage to deal with the Pentagon Thief, who will get a little bit more stronger each round and every time he appears as well, but if you can kill him before he touches anybody, then you get massively rewarded by a very cheap upgrade machine. That's amazing, and I think it's one of the most punishing features that Black Ops 1 Zombies has to offer, but it's simultaneously one of the most rewarding as well, and I think that in combination with a lot of 5's very deliberate choices make it feel a certain type of way. Now, outside of all this stuff that a first-time player will probably not be able to pick up on their first playthrough, like you're not going to understand how to deal with the Pentagon Thief, you're not going to understand the risk reward of getting to the lab all that much, right? Like this map requires a lot of experience, but more so, you're also not really able to take advantage of traps like you are in Kino der Toten, where you just turn on the power and then you can just start turning them on and running them. I feel like that's another factor to the perceived difficulty of 5, because a lot of people probably didn't know how to access the traps. You have these two kind of like metal detectors in the original, spawn room up in the office, but in order to be able to turn them on, they require power boxes, and there are 2 of them in the map. There's one in the war room and then one downstairs in the labs, and you actually need these components in order to be able to access this. And once you can do that, the high round strategy of this map is pretty interesting. You pretty much just need a crossbow and you can keep running these traps as long as you have points. But the moral of the story is that in order to access or get your hands on a lot of these really strong mechanics that the map has to offer, you do have to venture into the most dangerous parts. You have to go retrieve these components, you have to know where to place them, and then you also kind of need to know intuitively like how to run this trap effectively as well, because it's not so straightforward or obvious. 5 has a pretty steep learning curve, and outside of all of this stuff, I think it gives you a lot to chew on, but there really isn't a whole lot going on in this map outside of those things. There's not really any side Easter eggs to speak of. I mean, you do have the pig in the labs, that's cool, but it's not really like anything crazy. But fundamentally, what 5 has to offer is a very challenging gameplay experience, and its replayability is found in the fact that you're supposed to kind of learn these small nuances of the map after multiple playthroughs. That's what is really driving replayability here. Maybe on your 5th playthrough, you find one of the parts for the trap that you didn't see before down in the labs, or maybe you kind of understand how to, maybe you find a spot to deal with the Pentagon Thief where he's not able to touch you and you can keep farming these bonfire sales. It's these small nuances that I think really drive the replayability, not necessarily the content, because there isn't a whole lot going on in this map outside of these very core features, which I do think a lot of them are great, but the map can feel kind of plain sometimes, especially in comparison to more modern COD Zombies maps. Now, that's kind of the design of 5. I want to compare it to Classified. Classified is kind of a weird map because it has almost the same layout as 5, with a few extra playable locations that weren't featured in the original experience, but it doesn't play like 5 at all, and part of that is due to Black Ops 4's unique new systems that the game introduced, but a lot of that is also just deliberate design choices that they either just, failed to implement or just decided against. For example, that deliberate path that's baked into 5, where the only way forward is to buy into that elevator hallway. In Classified, however, you can go into that hallway initially, or you can access these back rooms right off the spawn that were previously inaccessible in the original map. This is interesting because I think a lot of us players back in the day wanted to know what was back in these rooms. Like, we wanted to access this when we were playing the original map of 5, but it was a non-playable space. In Classified, you can go back here and it has stuff in it, right? There's a lot of radios and wisps that you can hear Samantha, talking and giving you storyline information, but more so than that, there's also a perk machine back here. There can be a mystery box spawn, and also there is a crafting bench and a couple of buildable pieces for a few different things. Now, to access a lot of the features of this map, it's a bit different than just simply turning on the power. You do need to build this teleporter device in order to get to Pack-a-Punch, and you also can build a zombie shield. I think it's these parts that really are supposed to drive you to explore the map, because turning on the power in Classified is far easier than it is on 5 because you have access to so many other resources that make it a little bit easier to get down there. It doesn't have that deliberate design where like you're kind of choked out on resources and the elevator is your first like moment of escape and you open up into the war room. If you have the box in the back rooms or even in the war room, you're pretty much like set and good to go to take on the labs before you even get there. So the balance, in my opinion, is a little bit off there, and I think a lot of that is just Black Ops 4 systems. Now, besides the back rooms area in the offices, there is another location that is opened up to us that wasn't previously accessible in 5. This back server room over in the war room can now be playable in Classified, and there are a couple of interesting things back here. There's a teleporter, there's a couple of these like film reels and radios and stuff like that. There's a mystery box location, but to be honest, this server room is kind of pointless to the overall like gameplay experience. A lot of it is just here for narrative and story reasons, but it's nice to be able to have this extra area, I suppose, but it does kind of change the flow and feel of that downstairs war room space, because that's kind of the only viable training area in 5, but when you open up this door, it kind of changes the rhythm. Now, you still turn on the power the exact same way, the visors open up and you have access to these other rooms, but again, the mystery box is not spawning there initially, or at least not usually, so sometimes you don't even really get the reward for turning on the power per se. And also, you'll notice that the teleporters are immediately different. They're now no longer a random teleport. You can actually choose where you want to go because these rotate every couple of seconds. You have 3 different icons indicating where you're going to go next. So you can control if you go to the offices, the war room, or the labs, which again, I guess from a gameplay perspective is nice, but in my opinion, it does take away a little bit of that chaotic charm that 5 was able to pull off. It's really going for that challenging, chaotic experience, and I think random teleporters suit that a bit more. Now, do I like being able to choose where I go? Honestly, it's convenient and it's nice, but is it the best option? I don't really know. One of the biggest differences between 5 and Classified is the Pack-a-Punch system. Again, in 5, you turn on all the death cons, it takes you to the panic room, and you have a safe couple of seconds in there to upgrade your weapon. However, in Classified, you turn all the death con panels. There is one actually now in the server room that wasn't there before, so the locations are slightly different, but when you activate all of those and go to the panic room, instead of getting Pack-a-Punch, you get a piece of a teleporter, which will give you access to Pack-a-Punch a bit later once you build that device on one of the workbenches. And upon putting that together and putting it downstairs in the center of the war room, every time you go to Pack-a-Punch now, it's going to take you to Groom Lake instead. Yes, the spawn room of Moon. This is obviously here for storyline and narrative reasons, but it is the same playable space as the original No Man's Land on Moon. However, this is where Pack-a-Punch is to be found, and so you can upgrade your weapons here, but what you're going to notice is that there's a lot of debris around this area, and much of it is not playable at first. What you have to do is survive a handful of rounds here, and every like 3 rounds or so, a little bit of the debris will disappear, meaning you can come and go as much as you please to upgrade more weapons, and, you know, eventually you survive long enough here, the entire playable space will open up. But the panic room is pretty much only useful for getting that initial teleporter piece, and also getting like a small thing for the Easter egg. When I said that 5 is one of the weirdest maps in Zombies, you're about to see why. I want to talk about Classified's Wonder Weapon quest and its, I guess, quote-unquote main Easter egg, because yes, it does have a main quest, but it's not acquired in any real traditional means or anything we've seen before, but it does have a little bit of an Easter egg, and it's typically to acquire the Winter's Howl for free, or what's called Project Scotty in this map. It is admittedly pretty neat. Like, you have to go around the map and do a couple of interesting little Easter egg steps to acquire a set of codes. One of them, you need to grab a key from downstairs where the original jug machine is. You gotta use it to unlock a drawer upstairs. You gotta throw a grenade at this teleporter to get another code. You gotta go into the panic room to move this TV to get another, and so on. Like, you kind of have to do these creative things to get these 4 different codes, and then you input them on the center console in the war room. When you do that successfully, it will say Project Scotty unlocked, and then when you go back to Groom Lake, you're gonna have this free box over in the back left corner that when you finally get access to it, when the debris clears, you'll get a bonfire sale, and then you'll get a free Winter's Howl. We'll talk about the wonder weapon in just a second, but this is kind of like the map's Easter egg, if you want to consider it that. However, it does have a main quest, but this is the most odd main quest we've ever seen in Zombies, because in order to get the cutscene, I guess legitimately, you need to get to round 150. Yes, not round 100, not round 50, 150. This is very doable by a couple of different means in Black Ops 4. I mean, you can sit in this room by the shield and like spam the Hellion Salvo and use Ragnaroks. There's very easy ways, albeit kind of time consuming, to get to round 150, but that's supposed to be the way that you trigger the cutscene in this map, which is very strange. I remember when I was in California at the reveal event for Black Ops 4, and a lot of the guys at Treyarch were talking about how they wanted to do like something special for the high round community and wanted to give them a reason to high round and like maybe tie some kind of story elements to it. And I can kind of see what they were going for. Like, it would be sort of cool to have something accessible to high rounders that would sort of advance the story. I see what they were going for on paper, but the execution of this in Classified was really weird. Not to mention, I think it was initially solved by people just like glitching it and stuff like that, and, you know, breaking the game, not getting it how it was intended to be acquired. So it was a very poor execution, but a sick idea on paper. It just didn't really work. But there is, like, you know, you have to differentiate the Wonder Weapon quest, which is kind of feels like a main quest, versus the actual like round 150 quest, which is how you get the cutscene. It's very odd. Now, speaking of very odd, there are a handful of like jump scares in COD Zombies, right? Like, you can trigger them yourself, and this has one of the strangest ones in the entire game, and this is real. If you go to Groom Lake and you use a sniper rifle over on the side, you get a pop-up of last-gen Richthofen, and for how serious Black Ops 4 takes itself, this just felt, I mean, this felt very silly, but it felt incredibly out of pocket just to have a last-gen Richthofen pop-up for, you know, a map supposedly as serious as this one. It's funny, I'll give you that. It's just incredibly weird. Speaking of weird, let's talk about the Winter's Howl, because once you successfully complete Project Scotty, you get access to the free Winter's Howl that if you can of course get out of the mystery box as well, but if you want to get it guaranteed, you can do this little quest. But when you acquire it, I don't really have any problems with like how the Winter's Howl behaves in this map, honestly. Like, it's a decent wonder weapon and it's fun to use. It's fun to use in 5 as well. But my problem with it in Black Ops 4 is honestly its sound. It sounds like a laser gun, whereas in the original map 5, it actually sounds and feels like it's shooting ice or frost. It sounds very gritty and sharp, and I like how it sounds in the original map, but in BO4, for some reason, it sounds like a 1980s space laser gun. I'll let you listen to the two of them. But again, other than its very weird like sound effects, I do like how the Winter's Howl behaves in BO4, and it feels good to play with in this map. Now, unfortunately, the biggest sin I think Classified made was not its level design choices that are kind of odd. To me, it's the removal of the Pentagon Thief. That is sort of like the iconic feature that really solidified 5 as a unique experience, but it is nowhere to be found in this map. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a time constraint thing. I don't know if it just didn't really work with the gameplay systems. I'm not entirely sure why the Pentagon Thief isn't present. Instead, they just substitute it for regular old Hellhound rounds, and it just feels like so out of place, because it's like you had this super unique thing in the original map that is just not here for no reason. I mean, he's in the damn cutscene, he just doesn't appear in the map, and this feels like such a big missed opportunity, because again, it's that there's that small like mini game that you can play with the Pentagon Thief and how you manipulate him and deal with him that just is not present at all in Classified. They do try to like pan out the map with a lot of radios and reels and stuff like that to listen to story moments, but they're sacrificing a lot of what made the gameplay of the original map so special. I also think the implementation of Groom Lake is kind of out of place as well. Again, I get it from a narrative and story perspective. I understand why it's here, because the Ultimus crew is actually like posted up in this area. Like, it makes sense for the ending in the cutscene, but from a gameplay perspective, it feels so odd to just be teleported like so far away to Groom Lake Lake and you're in this small little playable space, and that's where Pack-a-Punch is, where traditionally it was that moment where you access the panic room, this kind of safe space where you get to upgrade and then deal with the hordes again. It was a tighter experience there, and I just feel like Groom Lake doesn't it just seems so tacked on. Now again, I don't really dislike Classified as a map. I think it's fine. I think it looks beautiful. Like, the visuals are amazing. There's a lot of, like, you know, features that are very much appreciated, like the manual teleporters or being able to access some of these other rooms, I think are interesting. But I do think that just simply copying and pasting the layout of 5 does lead to some weird moments where they aren't able to really capture the original purpose of what 5 was made for, and it just feels sometimes a little bit hollow or clunky, or like maybe they should have redesigned the layout entirely or made new systems to fit Black Ops 4 better, because just simply slapping a BO1 map into BO4 systems can lead to some very strange interactions. And Classified is a decent map. I just think it's very weird, and I think that's the best way to sum it up. I mean, 5 is also kind of a weird map if we're being honest, but Classified is weird in a totally different way, where it's trying to emulate that map but not really understanding the small nuances of what made it special. Again, I'll still never understand why they didn't include the Pentagon Thief here. I don't really get it. It's one of those things that make the map so distinct, but it just doesn't appear here, and the differences to the panic room and the progression of the layout in the beginning, it's just all a little bit off and kind of wrong. So it's a fine map on its own, but it just doesn't really compare to the original, at least in my opinion. But anyways, make sure to subscribe if you guys want me to do more analysis on maps like this. I'm thinking about doing Mob and Blood of the Dead and maybe some of these other remakes. Let me know what you would like to see next, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.